Why was she the only one who saw it? That question looped in her head as she sat at the edge of the briefing table, her hands folded over a worn manila folder. Around her, voices clashed like steel, officers debating, soldiers throwing in half-formed strategies, bravado echoing in the tent. The hum of generators outside mixed with cigarette smoke and the faint rustle of maps being flipped too quickly to be useful. She stayed quiet. She always did. They noticed her silence, of course. Some smirked at it, others ignored it. The lieutenant, a man whose shoulders always seemed to rise with his own self-importance, leaned over the maps and never once looked in her direction. One of the corporals at the back cracked a joke under his breath, a sharp laugh that made two others chuckle and shake their heads. The joke was about her. They didn't think she could hear, but she heard everything. And still she said nothing. Because silence, she had learned, was sharper than any blade. People underestimated it, but silence was control. Silence let you study the room while others wasted energy filling it. Silence meant you could see what they were blind to. The colonel spoke next, voice like gravel. He laid out the routes, the teams, the fire zones. His finger jabbed at the map, tracing paths across a desert that looked flat on paper but was anything but. She studied it the way she had the night before, eyes tracing each line like it was scripture. Her stomach tightened. Something was off. The ridgeline near Sector 7, too clean, too empty. An obvious path that looked safe, but her instincts screamed otherwise. She leaned back slightly, closed her eyes for half a beat. She could almost hear her brother's voice again, from years ago when they'd run drills in the woods behind their childhood home. The path that looks too easy, that's the one that gets you killed. Her eyes opened. The colonel's finger had just tapped that very ridge. But she said nothing, not yet. The meeting broke apart in noise and chatter. Soldiers grabbed gear lists, radio codes, last-minute notes scribbled in dirty notebooks. The lieutenant strutted past her, saying something to the sergeant about quiet types never lasting. The words stung, a heat that climbed up her neck, but she held her face still, her jaw tight. Her silence had become their punchline. They didn't know it was the only thing keeping her from fracturing open. She stepped outside into the night air. The desert greeted her with its vast emptiness, stars like cold pinpricks overhead, sand shifting under the faint breeze. The smell of diesel from parked trucks clung to everything. Her boots crunched softly as she walked past the perimeter lights, their glow casting long, thin shadows that followed her like ghosts. She stopped at the edge of camp. Beyond the wire, the desert stretched forever, but she knew what waited out there wasn't endless sand. It was ambushes and shadows, men who didn't care about flags or medals, men who had taken her brother. Her chest tightened and she closed her eyes. She was back in that kitchen years ago. The knock at the door, the two officers in dress uniforms, her mother's face collapsing into her hands as the folded flag appeared. Silence thicker than any she had ever known. She remembered staring out the kitchen window, hearing her brother's laugh in her head, and swearing she would not let it end like this, that his sacrifice would not dissolve into nothing. She whispered it into her palm, the words she had promised then, "Don't let them take us for nothing." That vow carried her here, into this desert, into this silence she wore like armor. She slept little that night. Lying in her cot, the canvas tent flapping in the dry wind, she listened to the others, snoring, muttering, shifting in restless sleep. Some prayed under their breath, some cursed. She kept her breathing steady, eyes open to the shadows above. Sleep would not come. Instead, she studied the sound of their breaths, the way fear leaked out of people when they thought no one was listening. Inside her, storms raged, doubt, fear. A quiet question that clawed at her. What if I can't do this? What if I fail like he did? She gripped the edge of the cot until her knuckles whitened. She pushed the thought down. Silence again became her weapon. She refused to let the fear speak. Dawn came with the metallic grind of vehicles starting, the hiss of radio checks, the sharp scent of gun oil. She laced her boots, slung her rifle, and walked into the rising sun. The sky burned orange over the ridgeline. The squad loaded into transports, laughter covering nerves, jokes masking dread. She said nothing. She just sat, the rifle across her lap, her eyes on the desert. Her heartbeat filled her ears louder than the engine. She tried to calm it, tried to match it with her breath. In through her nose, out through her lips. But it stayed, steady, urgent, like a drum calling her to something inevitable. They reached the edge of Sector 7. The lieutenant ordered the squad out, his voice firm but with a tremor beneath it. Boots hit sand. Weapons raised. The men spread into formation, scanning the rocks and ridges. She followed at the rear, her steps deliberate, her silence unshaken. Her eyes swept the terrain. The ridge, too clean, too quiet. She could feel the trap like a pulse under the ground. Every instinct screamed. But she still didn't speak. Not yet. The first crack shattered the calm like glass breaking. Dust burst near a soldier's boots. A scream tore the air. The desert exploded into chaos, gunfire ricocheting, shouting voices, the smell of burning powder stinging her nostrils. She dropped into cover, rifle in her hands before her mind caught up. She scanned fast, sharp, and there on the ridge, a glint of metal, a scope catching the sun. She steadied her breath. In, out, silence inside her became steel. Her fingers squeezed, the shot rang. A figure crumpled on the ridge, weapon tumbling down rocks. Gasps rose from the squad. Another glint, another breath, another shot. Silence again, followed by a body hitting stone. The men looked at her differently now. Their panic hung suspended in the air, waiting for something, for someone to anchor it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't give speeches. She simply moved, steady, precise, eyes sharp as glass. They followed her hand signals without question. And in that storm of bullets and dust, her silence became the only thing keeping them alive. Yet inside, every pull of the trigger weighed heavy. Every face she didn't see reminded her of the one she had lost. Her brother's voice echoed with every shot. "Don't let them take us for nothing." She gritted her teeth, pushed the ache deeper, and gave nothing away. When the last shots faded, when the ridge fell silent but for the moans of the wounded, she lowered her rifle. 3 of theirs were gone, 7 more bleeding, broken. The quiet that followed was worse than the chaos. Dust hung in the light like ash. The lieutenant slumped against rock, his hands shaking. No one spoke. She moved to the wounded. Gloves slick with blood, she worked without pause. Her hands were steady, her breath even. She tore fabric, packed wounds, tied tourniquets. Every movement precise, practiced. On the surface, unshaken. But inside, she trembled. Each life slipping between her hands tore at her in silence. She clenched her jaw, hid it from their eyes. When she finally sat back, sweat dripping, dust coating her face, she felt the eyes on her. The men who had mocked her silence, who had doubted her, now looked at her like she was something else, something they couldn't name. But she knew the truth. It wasn't strength they saw, it was a promise. A promise she was still keeping. And it was far from over. Why was the silence worse than the gunfire? She crouched over the last wounded man, tying a strip of cloth so tight her knuckles went white. His breath came shallow, ragged, each exhale leaving a damp stain on her gloves. Around her, the others sat in stunned quiet, staring at the sand, at their boots, at nothing at all. The world had gone eerily still, save for the occasional cough or groan. The desert had that way of swallowing sound. One moment it was filled with chaos, the next it pressed silence into every corner, as if the earth itself wanted to deny what had just happened. She hated it. Silence was her strength, but this kind of silence, after the screams, felt like a tomb. She pressed harder on the wound, forcing herself to breathe evenly. "Stay with me," she whispered under her breath. The words were for him, but maybe also for herself. His eyes fluttered, trying to stay open. She saw fear in them, not the kind that came with battle, but the kind that came with dying. He was barely 20, freckles still marking his face. She thought of her brother for a heartbeat too long. The lieutenant stumbled forward, his voice cracking as he tried to sound like an officer. We regroup. We hold position." His words fell flat, half-hearted, and no one moved. He rubbed a hand across his face, smearing dust and sweat into a paste. He wasn't built for this, not this kind of silence. Her eyes shifted to him, sharp, unflinching. She didn't speak, but the look said everything. You don't know what you're doing. He avoided her gaze. The boy beneath her gasped, a shudder racing through him. She pressed down harder, teeth gritted, and leaned close. "You're not leaving me here," she muttered, fierce but low. He blinked once, maybe understanding, maybe not. But his breathing steadied, if only slightly. When she finally tied the last knot, her hands were shaking beneath her calm exterior. She sat back, sweat dripping down her neck, rifle across her knees. Dust clung to her face. The desert stretched around them, indifferent. The squad looked to her now, though no one asked outright. Their eyes betrayed it, the shift. The silence wasn't mocking anymore. It was waiting. She didn't want it. Not this way. Not with blood still on her gloves and a promise echoing in her chest. She wasn't here to lead. She was here to survive, to keep a vow no one else could see. But when the lieutenant spoke again, she knew what would happen. We should move out." His voice cracked on the last word, breaking like glass under weight. And that was it, silence, then eyes all on her. She let it hang there, heavy, before she finally spoke, her voice low, steady, carrying farther than she thought possible. "No, we don't move." The word no landed harder than a gunshot. A ripple went through them. The lieutenant bristled, his jaw tightening, but he didn't argue. Not yet. She stood, scanning the ridgeline again, her eyes narrowing. The trap wasn't over. That was the mistake most made. They thought ambushes ended when the first shots died. But no, she could feel it. The silence wasn't peace. It was a coil, wound tight, waiting to strike again. Her brother had taught her that 2 years before. A lesson in their backyard, using sticks as rifles and shadows as enemies. "If it feels too quiet," he had said, "then it isn't over. Don't move until you know." She turned back, her voice just loud enough for the squad. "We move, we die." It wasn't an explanation. It didn't need to be. Their eyes told her they believed. Maybe not fully, but enough to stay put. The lieutenant's lips pressed into a thin line. Anger, humiliation. She saw it in his eyes, the fight building. But before he could speak, another sound cut the silence. A single crack, not from her rifle. The lieutenant staggered, his body jerking as a round tore into his shoulder. He collapsed, face first into the sand. The silence broke into chaos again. Bullets rained down from a second ridge, closer this time, sharper. Men scrambled for cover, shouting, cursing, praying. Dust erupted around them. The desert roared. She dropped instantly, her body finding the rhythm it always did. Breath, scope, glint of movement, a finger squeeze, another enemy crumpled. She shifted, rolled, fired again. Her silence wasn't stillness, it was focus. Every sound fell away but her own breath. But it wasn't enough. The boy she had just saved screamed as a bullet tore past him, grazing his leg. Blood sprayed across the sand. Her stomach clenched, but she didn't falter. She couldn't. She crawled to him, dragging his body behind a rock, her own chest pressed to the dust. Bullets smacked the stone, shards breaking off inches from her face. She ignored it, hands steady, voice low. "Look at me, you're not going to die here." His wide eyes locked onto hers, and she saw trust in them. Not earned by words, earned by silence, by action. Her rifle barked again, silencing another shadow. Minutes bled into hours, or at least it felt that way. The squad fought like cornered animals, fear mixing with fury. One by one, the gunfire thinned until finally, the desert fell silent once more. Her heart pounded. Sweat poured down her back. She sat against the rock, rifle across her knees, chest heaving. The lieutenant lay groaning nearby, clutching his shoulder. The boy beside her was alive, barely, his leg bandaged in strips of her own shirt. The survivors looked at her, dust-streaked faces hollow with exhaustion. Their eyes said what their mouths didn't: "You saved us." But inside she felt none of it, only the weight, the bodies on the sand, the silence pressing down. her brother's voice echoing louder now. "Don't let them take us for nothing." She lowered her head into her hands, unseen by the others. For a moment, just a moment, she let herself break. Silent tears hidden by the shadows of her helmet. She hated herself for it, hated the weakness. But it came anyway, sharp and bitter. Then she wiped her face with bloody gloves, stood and shouldered her rifle. The squad straightened instinctively, like soldiers do when someone steadies them. She didn't want to lead, but silence had made her the anchor. She pointed toward the horizon, her voice calm, steady, unyielding. "We move when the sun shifts, not before." No one argued. The silence held, not mocking now, but waiting for her next word. And though her face showed nothing, her heart whispered a truth she would never admit aloud. She was terrified. How long could silence hold a squad together? That question haunted her as the sun crept higher, shadows shrinking against the rocks. The desert heat pressed down on them, relentless, wrapping every soldier in sweat and dust. She sat apart from the others, rifle across her lap, eyes scanning the ridgeline like a hawk. They thought she was calm. In truth, her heart rattled against her ribs, every muscle tight with waiting. The wounded groaned softly. The boy she had saved earlier drifted in and out of consciousness, his lips pale, his breath shallow. She kept glancing at him, checking, as though her eyes alone could keep him tethered. Each time she looked, she saw her brother. Not in the face, not really, but in the fragility, in the way youth didn't belong in blood-soaked sand. She rubbed a thumb over the smooth edge of her rifle's trigger guard, her mind drifting back to the kitchen again. That knock, that folded flag, her mother's silence, heavier than grief itself. That was why she kept hers now. Speaking meant opening, and opening meant breaking. Silence was armor. But silence didn't cool the heat, didn't slow the ticking in her mind. The lieutenant shifted against a rock, grunting as his bandaged shoulder bled through. His voice cracked when he spoke, low enough only she could hear. "You think you know better than me." She turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes without flinching. Dust streaked his face, his lips pale, but his pride hadn't bled out yet. Her silence was answer enough. He gave a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "They'll follow you now, not me. You wanted that." She shook her head slowly. "I didn't want any of this." Her voice was steady, but inside it wavered. He studied her for a long moment, then looked away, his eyes clouding. Maybe with pain, maybe with shame, she didn't care which. She couldn't carry his feelings, too. She already carried enough. The hours dragged, heat suffocating. The squad dozed in turns, drinking sparingly from their canteens. No one joked now. No one mocked. The silence was thick but not cruel anymore. It was waiting, watching. Finally, when the sun tipped, when shadows stretched long again, she stood. Her body ached, but her decision was clear. "We move," she said simply. No one argued. They lifted the wounded onto makeshift stretchers, grimacing under the weight. Every step kicked up dust, each grain clinging to sweat, to wounds, to breath. The desert was merciless, but they moved because she had spoken. That realization gnawed at her as much as it steadied them. She led them across a narrow pass, eyes always on the ridges. Every flicker of movement made her finger twitch near the trigger. The silence pressed in, but she welcomed it. Silence told her things if she listened. A crow circling overhead. The absence of insects in the sand. The way wind shifted when it carried smoke from somewhere unseen. She noticed it before anyone else. Faint footprints cutting across the rocks, too fresh, too deliberate. She froze, lifting a fist. The squad halted instantly, breathing heavy, eyes darting. Her heart pounded, but her face stayed cold. She crouched, studying the prints. Light, fast, too many for a patrol. She didn't speak. She just raised two fingers, signaling what they all feared. Ambush ahead. The lieutenant saw it too late. His jaw dropped, realization crashing across his face. The others looked to her, their breaths caught. She scanned the rocks, pulse hammering. Her brother's voice whispered through memory, "Trust what doesn't feel right, even if you can't prove it yet." Her chest tightened. She stood slowly, raised her rifle, and fired into an empty patch of rock. The squad flinched, then the ridge exploded. Gunfire rained down, deafening. Enemy fighters rose from the rocks like shadows given flesh. Bullets sparked against stone, tearing sand into storms. The squad dove for cover, shouting, returning fire blindly. She dropped, rolled behind a boulder, breath steady. She lined her scope, fired once. A shadow fell. She shifted, fired again. Another gone. Her silence steadied her, but inside her thoughts screamed, "You can't lose them. Not again, not like him." The boy on the stretcher cried out, bullets tearing too close. She sprinted low, dragging him further back, shielding him with her own body as dust sprayed their faces. His hand clutched hers, weak but desperate. She squeezed back hard. "Hold on," she whispered fiercely. "I've got you." The fight dragged on. Minutes bled like hours. Her arms ached, her ears rang. She caught glimpses of the others, one praying under his breath as he reloaded, another cursing each bullet he fired, another frozen until she barked his name and snapped him out of it. Each one was human, terrified, clinging to thin threads. Finally the gunfire thinned, echoes fading. Smoke and dust hung heavy, choking every breath. The survivors panted, faces hollow, eyes wild. The silence returned. But this time it wasn't empty, it was survival. She sat against the rock, chest heaving, rifle slipping from her grip. Her hands trembled openly now. She clenched them, forcing the shake to still. The squad's eyes were on her again, always on her. The lieutenant staggered over, clutching his shoulder, pale as ash. He looked at her long, as if seeing her for the first time. His lips parted, a word forming, but it died in his throat. He lowered his gaze, humbled. She didn't need his words. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence wash over her. For the first time, it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a truth. Because she understood now, her quiet strength wasn't just hers. It was theirs, the only thing holding them together. And yet deep inside, another truth whispered, one she dared not voice. Every life she saved tore at her more than the one she lost. She opened her eyes, scanning the horizon. Night was falling. The desert would grow colder, crueler. They weren't out of danger, not even close. She stood, her voice low, certain. "We move again before dark." And without waiting for agreement, she led them into the coming night. Her silence followed, but so did their trust. Her boots crunched softly against the gravel, each step blending with the muffled rhythm of the night wind. But what she heard most was not her own movement. It was the echo of the briefing room still replaying in her mind. Words sharp as glass, laughter she didn't join in, and that unspoken assumption. She was there to fill a chair, not to change the course of a mission. Why did their doubts cling to her so stubbornly? She kept walking. The compound around her was alive in hushed tones, diesel hum from a generator, muffled radio chatter leaking from tents, boots dragging in fatigue. Everyone carried the same tension in their shoulders, yet somehow her silence marked her different. She had learned long ago not to answer mockery with fire. Fire wasted energy. Fire made you predictable. Silence. That unsettled them. But silence also had a cost. It left her with no outlet for the tight knot under her ribs. And tonight, that knot would follow her into the mission. The squad had gathered hours earlier under harsh fluorescent lights. Maps were spread across the table, lines drawn through narrow valleys and jagged terrain. Voices layered over each other, opinions, corrections, bravado. She stood at the far end, eyes locked on the red-marked zone. It wasn't just ink to her. That zone wasn't just an objective. It was a place that carried weight she hadn't shared yet. "Are you even paying attention?" One of the men had snapped, half smiling as if it were a joke. The others chuckled, the sound bouncing sharp against the metal walls. She didn't look up, didn't answer, because if she spoke, she might reveal too much. And not yet, not here. Instead, she leaned in closer to the map. Her hand hovered over the coordinates. She saw details they hadn't, a slope that would funnel sound, a ridge line perfect for an ambush, a stream that could mask approach. They saw lines. She saw silence. And silence could be a weapon. Now under the night sky, her pack heavy against her shoulders, she thought of that unspoken truth. That zone wasn't random. It was where her brother's unit had gone dark 2 years ago. The report had been clean, sterile, compromised, no survivors. But she had read between the lines. Something had gone wrong there that no one dared explain. And now fate had placed her steps in the same dirt where he had disappeared. She adjusted her rifle strap and exhaled, letting the desert air cool her lungs. She remembered his voice, the way he used to joke she never spoke enough. "You'll have to learn to speak up one day," he teased. He hadn't understood. Her strength was not in filling silence, it was in carrying it. A voice crackled softly in her earpiece. "Team Bravo, move." The column shifted, shadows sliding over shadows. She fell into position at the rear. That was where they wanted her, where she couldn't slow them down, couldn't interfere. They didn't realize the rear carried its own power. It was where patterns revealed themselves, where the smallest misstep could be caught before it unraveled everything. Ahead, Davis whispered something crude. A couple of the men laughed under their breath. Even on the edge of danger, they found room for mockery. She didn't react. She watched their shoulders instead, the way one tightened more than the other, betraying a hidden limp. She noted how another's breathing was sharp, ragged, fear eating the air before it filled his lungs. Silence showed her more than words ever could. Hours bled away in careful movement, the moon a pale witness above. Then a hand signal, "Stop." Everyone froze, kneeling low. The squad leader raised a fist and pointed toward a cluster of ruins ahead. Dark, jagged outlines against darker sky. The target zone. The squad began fanning out. She kept to the edge, scanning, ears tuned to more than human movement. That was when she heard it. A faint scrape. Not theirs. Too deliberate. Too close. She narrowed her eyes toward the ridge above, the one she had marked earlier in her head. But she said nothing. Not yet. Her heart drummed against her ribs. If she was wrong, they would dismiss her forever. If she was right, speaking now could trigger panic. So she waited, silent, measuring the rhythm. Then it came again. The soft shift of rock, the stutter of breath where breath shouldn't be. She reached for a small stone at her feet, weighing it in her palm. The squad leader's hand twitched, about to signal an advance. Her pulse surged. She flicked the stone sideways, letting it clatter against rubble. Instantly, movement sparked above, the silhouette of a weapon rising, muzzle glinting under moonlight. The squad reacted in chaos. Shouts, rifles snapping up, a volley of fire cracking through the night. Dust exploded from the ridge as figures broke from cover. Ambush, just as she had known. But in the confusion, nobody noticed her eyes fixed on the far slope, where another figure didn't move with the rest. A shadow that lingered, watching, too still, too patient. She pressed her cheek to her rifle, sight steady. Breath slowed. Silence wrapped around her like armor. In that stillness, she felt her brother's absence beside her, and in that silence she found her strength. The shot rang once, clean, final. The figure dropped before it could lift its weapon. When the echoes faded, the squad was breathing hard, swearing under their breaths. They scanned the ridge, stunned. They hadn't been ready. They hadn't seen it coming. But she had. The leader's eyes swept toward her, suspicion caught between gratitude and unease. "How did you?" he began, then stopped himself. He didn't ask. He didn't want to admit what her silence had revealed. She lowered her rifle slowly, the weight of memory heavy in her chest. They still didn't see her. Not really. But she had seen the battlefield shift before it happened, and that was enough for now. As they regrouped, a thought pressed at her like a whisper she couldn't silence. This wasn't the end. The ruins ahead were waiting, and somewhere in that silence lay the truth about her brother. But she wasn't ready to tell them that. Not yet. Why had the ruins fallen so quiet? That was the question pressing in her chest as the squad crept closer, rifles raised, boots slipping in dust that smelled of ash and old stone. The firefight at the ridge had ended minutes ago, yet the silence that followed wasn't relief, It was suffocating. Silence could mean empty, but silence could also mean waiting. She kept to the flank, every muscle tuned to the faintest sound. The moonlight caught edges of shattered walls, broken pillars leaning like bones against the earth. Her breath slowed. The air here felt different, heavier. They stacked against the first wall. The squad leader's hand flicked signals, advance, cover, clear. One by one they moved in, their boots whispering over the ground. Her place was at the rear again, as always, where she was least trusted, least seen. And yet, that vantage gave her sight no one else had. Inside, the ruins were a maze. Corridors of collapsed stone led into chambers half buried by time. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching long. The squad's voices came low and clipped, every word echoing too loud in her ears. They moved as soldiers do, efficient, methodical, confident in numbers. But she felt something else gnawing at the edges of the dark. Her brother's last transmission had come from here. She remembered the clipped tone of the report, the unfinished words before silence swallowed it. He had been somewhere within these walls when his voice vanished. She could almost hear it now, half a word, then nothing. That memory clung to her with every step deeper into the ruins. They reached a central chamber. Broken beams sprawled across the floor, moonlight seeping through cracks in the ceiling. The squad began setting up a perimeter, checking their maps. The squad leader's jaw tightened as he scanned the shadows. Then Davis muttered, "Doesn't feel right, too damn quiet." For once she agreed with him. She crouched low near a shattered column, fingers brushing dust. The patterns in it weren't random. Too clean, too disturbed in certain places, tracks, fresh ones, not just from the ambushers outside. These were deeper, drawn into the ruins themselves. Someone had been moving supplies, bodies, something, recently. Her pulse quickened. She glanced up to warn the others, then stopped herself. Would they even listen? Or would her silence be mocked again, drowned beneath their assumptions? Still, the knot in her stomach told her she couldn't let it pass. "Wait," she said quietly. Her voice cracked the air like something fragile breaking. Heads turned, surprised more by the fact that she had spoken at all than by the word itself. She pointed toward the floor. "Tracks. They lead deeper." For a beat no one moved. Then one of the men scoffed, shaking his head. Could be anything, animals, old. She met his eyes and held them steady and unflinching. Not old, hours, maybe less. Her tone carried no heat, no need to convince, just fact. Silence made her words sharper when she chose to use them. The squad leader studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "We follow." They shifted formation and pressed deeper. The walls narrowed, the air cooling as the moonlight faded. Their flashlights sliced the dark into harsh beams. Every sound became sharper, breathing, fabric shifting, metal tapping stone. And then a whisper. It wasn't words, just a scrape faint like cloth dragged across stone. She froze. The squad kept moving. She raised her hand instinctively, but hesitation gripped her wrist. They hadn't trusted her once, why would they now? Still, she couldn't shake it. Her silence had saved them once already tonight. She trusted it more than their noise. She broke from the line, crouching low, letting her light skim along the wall. There it was again, a faint shift. She swung her rifle up, finger brushing the trigger, then stopped. It wasn't an enemy, it was a boy. Thin, dirt-streaked, eyes wide and hollow. He froze under her beam like a trapped animal, lips trembling but no sound leaving his mouth. He couldn't have been older than 12. Her throat tightened. For a moment she saw her brother's face at that age, skinny, reckless, always daring. She lowered her weapon slowly, kneeling, keeping her movements soft. The boy's eyes darted, panicked, then landed on her. Something flickered there. Recognition. Fear. "Safe," she whispered, the word rough from disuse. She touched her chest, then pointed to him. "Safe." The boy didn't move. His eyes flicked past her toward the corridor behind, then back. Warning. She turned just as shadows moved at the far end of the chamber, figures emerging. Silent, disciplined, too coordinated to be scavengers, armed. Her silence turned cold steel in her veins. "Contact," the squad leader hissed. The chamber erupted, gunfire cracking, stone splintering, echoes drowning everything. She dove behind the column, heart hammering. The boy vanished into the dark. The squad fought hard, rifles spitting light, the ruin shaking with each blast. But the enemy pressed in from angles too sharp, too fast. This wasn't random resistance. It was planned. They were being funneled deeper. Her mind raced. This wasn't just another mission. This place was alive with secrets, and whoever had taken her brother had never left. Amid the gunfire, she steadied her breath, forcing herself into the calm silence she knew best. Around her, chaos reigned. Inside, she found stillness. She rose, sighted and fired, not in panic but with precision. Each shot was a punctuation mark in the silence she carried. And beneath the noise, a single truth crystallized in her chest. This battle wasn't about proving herself to the squad. It was about uncovering the silence that had swallowed her brother. But to reach that truth, she would have to survive the ruins and carry others through with her, even if they never understood what her silence truly meant. What if silence was the only thing keeping them alive? That thought pulsed through her mind as the chamber shook with gunfire. The ruins amplified every shot into thunder, deafening and disorienting. Dust rained from the fractured ceiling, turning the air into a choking haze. The squad fired wildly, flashes of muzzle light strobing their strained faces. They were fighting back, but they weren't fighting smart. She pressed her body against the cold stone, eyes narrowing through the haze. The enemy wasn't rushing blindly. Their steps were measured, controlled, moving with a rhythm. Each burst of fire was a probe, testing the squad's panic, forcing them into predictable reactions. Her pulse slowed, finding calm in the storm. She watched patterns, a shadow crossing only when the squad leader barked, a flicker of a barrel appearing exactly 3 seconds after Davis fired. Silence revealed what noise concealed. "Hold fire," she whispered into her calm, voice low but sharp. No one heard her, or maybe they ignored it. Davis shouted something back, mocking, angry, desperate. The squad leader cursed, reloading. The ruin was descending into chaos. She swallowed hard. This was the moment. If she stayed silent, they would fall apart. But if she spoke louder, if she commanded instead of whispering, she risked breaking the very armor she had carried all her life. She clenched her jaw, heart pounding. Then she raised her voice clear and calm, "Cease fire now." The command cut sharper than the gunfire. For half a second the squad froze, not out of trust but shock. She used that sliver of silence. "There," she hissed, pointing toward the far archway. "Wait, listen." The chamber fell quiet, except for ragged breaths and the ringing in their ears. In that silence the enemy's rhythm became obvious. Footsteps cautious, a weapon bolt sliding into place, a whisper of movement along stone. She leveled her rifle, timing her breath with the sound. One squeeze of the trigger. The figure dropped mid-step, weapon clattering. Another shadow flinched. Now the squad understood. The leader's eyes flicked toward her, unreadable, then gave a sharp nod. On her count. It wasn't respect, not yet, but it was survival. She inhaled, waited, listened. Her hand rose, then cut down. The squad opened fire in unison, not in panic but in precision, directed by the silence she commanded. Figures collapsed, their ambush broken, their rhythm shattered. When the dust finally settled, the ruins were still again. The chamber smelled of cordite and blood, the silence heavier than before. One of the younger soldiers leaned against a wall, chest heaving, eyes wide with something like disbelief. Davis muttered, voice low, almost ashamed, "She saved us." But she didn't feel like a savior. Her hands trembled against the rifle, the weight of what had just happened pressing down. She had broken her silence, and for a moment it had given them life. But it also left her raw, exposed. The squad leader moved closer, his face hard but not dismissive. "How did you know?" he asked. She met his eyes steady. Silence tells more than noise. He studied her as if searching for a crack in the mask she wore, but she gave him nothing. Not about the boy she'd seen, not about the truth she was chasing here, not about her brother. As they regrouped, her thoughts drifted back to that boy's eyes. Hollow, warning, almost pleading. Why was he here? And why had he looked at her as if he recognized something in her silence? They pushed deeper into the ruins, flashlights cutting narrow paths through corridors thick with dust. The tracks on the ground grew clearer, more boots, dragging marks, equipment pulled along. This wasn't a hiding place. It was an operation. And somewhere ahead, buried in the dark, was the reason her brother had never come home. Her chest tightened as they moved. Every shadow seemed to whisper. Every silence carried weight. Her brother's absence wasn't an echo anymore. It was a presence, guiding her, pushing her forward. One soldier whispered nervously, "Feels like these walls are watching." She almost answered, almost told him that silence always watched, always remembered, but she bit the words back, not yet. Instead, she pressed forward, rifle steady, ears tuned to the quiet. And in that quiet, a promise hardened in her chest. She would not leave these ruins until she uncovered the truth, no matter what it cost her. Why did the silence ahead feel different, like it was hiding something alive? The squad advanced in staggered steps, their flashlights slicing across stone walls worn smooth by time. Dust hung in the beams, shimmering like a veil. She moved with them, yet apart from them, every nerve stretched toward the quiet that pressed heavier the deeper they went. This wasn't just absence of sound. It was a silence that seemed purposeful. Her brother's face haunted her in flashes. The grin that teased, the hand that steadied her rifle when she was just learning. The final transmission she had replayed countless times, ending with a sharp inhale, and then nothing. That same void now stretched ahead of her, pulling her closer with every step. The tracks on the floor grew fresher, more defined. Not just boots but drag marks, the grooves of crates or equipment. The squad leader raised a hand, motioning them to halt. His flashlight skimmed the stone and froze. Symbols, crude, painted in dark strokes along the walls. Not words they knew, but warnings perhaps, or claims of ownership. "What the hell is this place?" Davis muttered, his voice brittle. She stared at the markings, heart thudding. She had seen them before in the classified fragments of her brother's report. He had flagged them as unknown, dangerous, but the details had been buried, redacted. And now here they were, staring back at her in silence. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. The squad fanned out, rifles raised. At the center stood a cluster of makeshift structures, metal and wood lashed together, glowing faintly with generator light. Wires ran across the floor, leading to equipment half covered by tarps. And then she saw him again, the boy. He stood at the edge of the light, half hidden behind a beam. Dirt streaked his face, his clothes torn, eyes too old for his small frame. He looked straight at her, not at the squad, not at the weapons, just her. Her breath caught. "Why her?" Before she could move, a voice rang out. Harsh, commanding, foreign. Shadows shifted, figures emerging from behind the structures, weapons raised. The squad whipped around, guns up, breath sharp. A standoff. Her heart pounded. The enemy leader stepped forward, his face hard under the dim light. His words cut through the chamber, accented but clear. "Drop your weapons." The squad bristled. Fingers tightened on triggers. A single mistake and the silence would explode into fire again. But she didn't look at him. She looked at the boy. His lips moved, barely a whisper, but she read it. A single word. "Run." Her mind raced. If the boy was warning her, then this wasn't just a standoff. This was a trap. She scanned the chamber, the wires, the crates. The way the enemy's stance wasn't just about their rifles. They weren't waiting to fight. They were waiting for something to be triggered. And then she saw it. The faint red light blinking beneath one of the tarps. Explosives. Her chest tightened. If the squad fired now, if bullets hit the wrong place, the ruins would collapse. None of them would leave alive. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "Don't shoot," she whispered into her calm. The leader glanced at her sharply. "What?" "Look," she cut in, louder this time, her tone sharp enough to pierce the tension. She pointed toward the tarp. The squad's lights shifted, catching the faint glimmer of wires, the red blink. Realization spread like fire through their eyes. Silence pressed heavier. The enemy didn't move. The squad didn't move. It was her voice, her silence breaking again, that kept them balanced on the knife's edge. She lowered her rifle slowly, palms open. Every instinct in her screamed, but she let the silence guide her. Step by step, she moved toward the boy. The enemy leader barked something but didn't fire. He was waiting, curious, uncertain. She knelt near the boy, eyes level with his. "Why are you here?" she asked softly. His voice trembled, broken from disuse. "They keep us to work, to move things, to—" He stopped, eyes darting toward the crates. His throat bobbed. "They took soldiers too." Her stomach dropped. Soldiers. Her brother. The word lodged in her chest like shrapnel. Was he one of them? Was he kept here, alive or only once alive? The boy's hand gripped her sleeve, fierce in its desperation. "Don't let them." His voice cracked and tears welled, but he didn't finish. Behind her, tension crackled. The squad leader's voice was a low growl. "We need a way out, now." Her mind spun. There was no easy way out, not with the explosives, not with the enemy waiting, but silence had saved them before. Silence could again. She raised her hands higher, standing between both sides, her body a fragile barrier in the dim light. "We don't need to die here," she said, her voice low but carrying. "Not them, not us." The enemy leader's eyes narrowed, but he didn't move. Every second stretched thin. The squad waited. The enemy waited. And at the center of it all she stood, her silence broken, her strength revealed not in bullets but in the refusal to let noise decide the ending. Yet even as the standoff held, her heart burned with a single truth. Somewhere in these ruins, tangled in silence and shadow, was her brother's fate, and she was closer now than she had ever been. The question was, would the silence let her uncover it before it consumed them all? What happens when silence carries more truth than any words spoken aloud? The chamber held its breath. Two lines of rifles faced each other, fingers twitching against triggers, the faint blink of red light under the tarp marking death's heartbeat. Dust hung thick in the air, every mote frozen as if the ruins themselves refused to move. She stood between them, alone, unarmored, her voice the only thing holding the world together. Her brother's face burned in her memory, a flicker from another life. She remembered the kitchen window, his voice saying, "Don't let them take us for nothing." And now, in this suffocating silence, she finally understood. This was the moment his words had been waiting for. The boy clutched her sleeve tighter, his hand trembling but fierce. His eyes spoke more than his broken voice could. "Don't let them decide. Don't let them kill us to prove something." The squad leader hissed through the calm, "We need an order." His voice cracked with the weight of fear. He wanted her to tell them to fire, to finish it the way soldiers were trained. But she didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the enemy leader, his face carved from stone, eyes sharp but weary. She saw something in them, not cruelty, not victory, just survival. He wasn't here to win medals either. He was here for the same reason she was, to keep something alive, even in the ruins. She lowered her arms slowly, deliberately, her rifle slung useless at her side. Every breath was a risk, every heartbeat a dare. "Enough," she said softly. Not a command, not a plea, just truth. The silence deepened. No one moved. Then one of the younger enemy fighters shifted, his rifle lowering slightly. A ripple moved through both sides, hesitation breaking the hardened lines. The explosives still blinked in the shadows, but for the first time the chamber wasn't a cage. It was a choice. The squad leader's voice snapped again, sharper. "You're gambling with our lives." She turned, eyes steady, voice calm but edged. "No, I'm saving them, all of them." He flinched, the words cutting deeper than he expected, and then he nodded, not in agreement, not in belief, but in surrender to her silence, to her strength. The enemy leader barked something to his men, and slowly, weapons lowered. Not all at once, not in trust, but in recognition that noise wouldn't serve anyone here. The boy tugged at her sleeve, leading her toward the back of the chamber. His steps were quick, desperate. She followed, pulse hammering. The squad trailed cautiously, weapons half raised, unsure of whether they were walking into safety or another trap. Through a narrow passage they came to another room, smaller, darker, heavy with the smell of earth and old blood. Shapes lined the walls, cots, makeshift beds, chains. And in the far corner, slumped but breathing, was a soldier. Her breath caught, knees nearly buckling. For a heartbeat she thought it was him, her brother, the curve of the jaw, the angle of the shoulders, so familiar it hurt. She stumbled closer, hands shaking. But when the soldier lifted his head, the truth landed like a blade. Not him, someone else. His voice rasped raw. You shouldn't be here." Her chest constricted. "We came because we thought," she stopped herself. No, not we, she had come. She had followed silence, followed the ghost of her brother. The soldier's eyes softened with pity. There were many of us, not all made it. Her heart cracked, but she forced herself still. She reached into her vest, pulling out the photo she carried, creased, worn, of her brother in uniform. She held it up. "Did you see him?" The soldier's lips trembled, his eyes dropped. A long silence stretched before he gave the smallest nod. "He fought till the end." The words carved into her like stone. She wanted to scream, to shatter the silence with rage and grief. But instead she closed her eyes, letting the pain settle deep in her chest. Her brother was gone, truly gone, but not forgotten. His silence had brought her here, had given her the strength to stand where she stood. When she opened her eyes, there were no tears, just clarity. She rose, turning back toward the squad. Their faces were lined with confusion, exhaustion, fear. They didn't understand the weight she carried. They didn't need to. She spoke only once more, her voice quiet but unshakable. "We leave, now, with them." She gestured to the boy, to the freed soldier. The squad leader opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Something in her eyes silenced him more than any order could. He gave a sharp nod. They moved together, both sides, soldiers and enemies, captives and captors, through the ruins and into the pale light of dawn. The explosives were left untouched, the chamber still breathing behind them. No gunfire chased their steps. Outside, the desert stretched wide and endless, the horizon painted in soft gold. The squad dispersed, checking gear, tending wounds, muttering disbelief. The boy clung close to her side, his small hand gripping her sleeve like an anchor. She stood apart, staring at the rising sun. The silence of the ruins still echoed in her chest. It was not the silence of defeat. It was not the silence of loss. It was something deeper, something that had saved lives no metal would ever recognize. And as the wind swept across the sand, she felt her brother's voice one last time, quiet, steady, proud. "You kept the promise." She closed her eyes, letting the silence answer. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.